The palace of the Valari Empire was the most beautiful building in the known galaxy. Its walls were made of a strange white stone that glowed softly in the dark. Its towers reached so high that they seemed to touch the stars. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds dreamed of seeing it just once in their lives. Taiho saw it every day, but he was not allowed to enjoy it. He was a human, and humans were not welcome here. They were tolerated. They were used, but they were never respected. The Valari people were tall and graceful, with silver skin and eyes that shone like moons. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. To them, humans were children, weak little creatures from a small blue planet that had only discovered space travel a few centuries ago. Taiho had served in the royal palace for 2 cycles now. A cycle was about 2 Earth years. In that time, he had learned many things. He had learned to bow at exactly the right angle. He had learned to speak only when spoken to. He had learned to become invisible. Most of all, he had learned that no one believed in him. His post was in the outer ring, the farthest section of the palace from the queen's throne room. It was the least important position a guard could have. The message was clear. Humans could not be trusted near royalty. Their emotions were too wild. Their lives were too short. Their loyalty was too weak. Every day, Taiho stood at his post for 12 hours. He watched servants walk past without looking at him. He watched Valari guards patrol in their shining armor, their heads held high with pride. Sometimes, they would glance at him with something between pity and disgust. He never complained. He never argued. He simply stood and watched and waited in the quiet moments. He thought about Commander Juan. The old man had been like a father to Taiho. He had served alien empires for 30 years before his death. He had taught Taiho everything he knew about duty and honor and survival. "They will never believe in you," Juan had told him once, his weathered face serious. "Not until you give them a reason they cannot ignore. Until then, watch, learn, be patient. Your moment will come." Taiho held on to those words like a lifeline. His only friend in the palace was Sora. She was a human woman who worked as a medic in the lower levels. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and she was the only person who made Taiho feel like he still belonged to something. They would eat together in the small room where human workers were allowed to rest. The food was simple and tasteless, but Sora always found a way to make him smile. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked him one evening. Taiho thought about it. He had left Earth when he was very young. His memories of it were faded and soft, like old photographs. Blue skies, green grass, the sound of rain on a window. "Sometimes," he said, "but I do not think I will ever go back." Sora nodded. She understood. Humans who left Earth to serve in alien empires rarely returned. The journey was too long. The cost was too high. And after enough time, Earth started to feel like a dream rather than a home. "Then we must make the best of this place," she said with a small smile. "Even if they do not want us here." Taiho agreed. He did not have a choice. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. Taiho continued his quiet routine. He stood at his post. He watched and learned. He practiced combat forms in his small room at night, studying the Valari fighting style from training videos he had found. He did not know why he felt the need to improve. He only knew that Juan would have wanted him to. Then one evening, everything changed. Taiho was patrolling a corridor in the lower levels. It was a part of the palace that few people visited. The lights were dim, and the air smelled old and dusty. He was about to turn back when he heard voices. He stopped. The voices were coming from behind a half-open door. They were low and urgent, the kind of voices that did not want to be heard. Taiho moved closer. He pressed his back against the wall and listened. "The moons will align in 15 days, a deep voice said. "That is when we strike. And the Queen's guards?" Another voice asked. "They will be dealt with. Lord Chiron has made arrangements. Most of them are already on our side. The rest will be killed before they can react." Taiho's heart began to pound. Lord Chiron was one of the highest nobles in the empire. He was rich and powerful and respected. The idea that he would betray the queen seemed impossible, but the voices continued. What about the human guards? There was a cruel laugh. "The humans? They are nothing. They will run at the first sign of danger. Their kind always does." Taiho felt his hands curl into fists. He forced himself to stay calm. He needed to hear more. "When the moons align, the queen dies," the deep voice said, "and Lord Chiron takes the throne. The empire will have a new ruler by morning." Footsteps approached the door. Taiho slipped away into the shadows, his mind racing. He moved quickly and quietly back to the main corridors, his training keeping his movements silent. He had just discovered a plot to kill the queen of the Valari Empire. He had just learned that one of the most powerful men in the galaxy was a traitor, and he was the only one who knew. Taiho walked through the glowing halls of the palace, his face calm but his thoughts wild. He was a human. He was nobody. He had no power, no influence, no friends in high places. Who would believe him? He thought about going to the captain of the guard, but the captain was Valari. He had looked at Taiho with contempt from the very first day. He would never listen to a human accusing a high lord of treason. He thought about telling someone in the queen's court, but he did not know anyone there. And even if he did, why would they trust the word of a lowly guard from a primitive species? He felt the weight of the secret pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He carried it back to his small room and sat on his bed in the darkness. Outside his window, the first of the twin moons was rising. It cast a pale silver light across the floor. 15 days. He had 15 days to find a way to stop them, or the queen would die, and no one would ever know that a human had tried to save her. Taiho did not sleep that night. He lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what Commander Juan would have done. The answer came to him as the sun began to rise. Juan would have found a way, no matter the cost, and so would he. Taiho spent the next 3 days watching Lord Chiron from the shadows. It was dangerous work. If anyone caught him following a high lord, he would be arrested. If Lord Chiron discovered that someone knew his secret, Taiho would simply disappear. Humans did not get trials in the Valari Empire. They did not get second chances. They just vanished, and no one asked questions. But Taiho could not stay silent. The weight of what he knew was too heavy to carry alone. He watched. Lord Chiron moved through the palace like a king who already wore the crown. The noble was tall even for a Valari, with cold silver eyes and a smile that never reached them. He walked with absolute confidence, greeting other nobles with warm words while his guards followed behind him like shadows. Taiho noticed things that others missed. He saw Lord Chiron meet with strange soldiers in hidden corners of the palace. These soldiers did not wear the royal uniform. Their armor was black, and their faces were hard and cruel. Mercenaries, Taiho realized. Hired killers from beyond the empire's borders. He saw the way certain guards nodded at Lord Chiron with a special kind of respect. Not the formal respect of duty, but the quiet understanding of men who share a secret. These guards had been bought. When the moment came, they would turn their weapons against their own queen. Each night, Taiho returned to his room and wrote down everything he had seen. He drew maps of where the mercenaries were staying. He listed the names of guards who seemed loyal to Lord Chiron. He recorded the times and places of secret meetings, but information was useless without someone to give it to. On the 4th day, he went to SOR. She was working in the medical bay when he found her. The room was quiet and clean, filled with strange machines that hummed softly. Sora looked up when he entered, and her smile faded when she saw his face. "Something is wrong," she said. It was not a question. Taeho closed the door behind him. He looked around to make sure they were alone. Then he told her everything. Sora's face grew pale as she listened. Her hands trembled slightly when he described the plot to kill the queen. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You cannot tell anyone," she finally said. "Taeho, do you understand what will happen if you accuse a High Lord of treason? They will not investigate. They will not ask questions. They will just make you disappear." "I know," Taeho said quietly, "but I cannot stay silent. If the queen dies, thousands will suffer. Lord Chiron is cruel. His rule would be a nightmare for everyone, especially for species like us." Sora reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold. "Then find proof," she said. "Real proof that they cannot ignore. Something that will make them listen even though you are human." Taeho nodded slowly. She was right. Words alone would never be enough. He needed something solid, something that would force them to see the truth. But getting proof meant getting closer to Lord Chiron, and getting closer meant risking everything. The next day, Taeho tried the proper way first. He went to the office of the captain of the guard and requested a meeting. He waited for 3 hours before a junior officer finally spoke to him. The officer was young and arrogant, with the bored expression of someone who had never faced real danger. "You wish to report something?" the officer asked, not looking up from his papers. "Yes, sir. I have information about a possible threat to the queen." The officer finally glanced at him. His eyes moved over Taeho's human features, and something close to amusement crossed his face. "A threat to the queen? From whom?" "I would prefer to speak to the captain directly, sir. The matter is sensitive." The officer laughed. It was not a kind laugh. A human guard wishes to speak directly to the captain about a sensitive matter. "Do you know how many requests I process each day? Do you think the captain has time to listen to every nervous alien who imagines threats in the shadows?" Taeho kept his face calm. "Sir, I believe there is a real danger. If you would just— Enough." The officer waved his hand dismissively. "Return to your post. If there is a genuine threat, the captain will learn of it through proper channels, not from a human who guards empty hallways in the outer ring." Taeho wanted to argue. He wanted to grab the officer and shake him and make him understand. But he knew it would do no good. He had seen this look before. The officer did not see him as a fellow guard. He saw him as something lesser, something that could not possibly have anything important to say. Taeho left the office with his fists clenched at his sides. He tried 2 more times over the following days. He spoke to a senior guard who laughed at him. He tried to pass a message to one of the Queen's advisors, but the message was never delivered. Each time, the response was the same: doubt, dismissal, contempt. A human questioning a High Lord? Know your place, Earthling. The words burned in Taeho's chest. He was trying to save them, and they would not even listen. By the 10th day, Taeho had stopped trying to convince others. He realized that no one would believe him. Not until the blood was already spilling on the throne room floor. By then, it would be too late. He sat in his small room as the twin moons rose outside his window. They were brighter now, closer to their alignment. 5 more days. 5 days until Lord Chiron made his move. Taeho thought about his options. He could run. He could take Sora and leave the palace before the violence began. They could find a transport off-world and never look back. It would be the smart choice. The safe choice. But he kept thinking about Commander Juan. The old man had died protecting a diplomat's child during a rebellion on a distant world. The child had lived. Juan had not. The galaxy had forgotten him within a week. His name was not recorded in any history. His sacrifice was not honored by any monument, but Taiho remembered. He remembered every story Juan had told him. He remembered the way the old man had looked when he spoke about duty and honor. Some things matter more than survival, Juan had said once. Some things are worth dying for. You will know them when you see them. Taiho looked at the moons. He thought about the queen, alone on her throne, unaware of the danger gathering around her. He thought about Lord Chiron and his cruel smile. He thought about all the innocent people who would suffer under a tyrant's rule. He could not run. He could not stay silent, if no one would listen. Then he would act alone. He would place himself where the danger was greatest. He would be there when the mercenaries came. And he would fight, even if it meant his death. Taiho stood and walked to his window. The palace glowed silver in the moonlight, beautiful and peaceful. But beneath that beauty, darkness was growing. In 5 days, everything would change. And when it did, Taiho would be ready. He did not know if he could make a difference. He did not know if anyone would remember him after he was gone. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not abandon his post. He would not flee like the others expected him to. When the moment came, he would stand. The night of the twin moons arrived with terrible beauty. Taiho stood at a window and watched the 2 moons rise together in the dark sky. They were perfectly aligned, one slightly behind the other, creating a ring of silver light that made the whole palace glow. It was the kind of sight that poets wrote about. The kind of moment that lovers remembered forever. But Taiho felt only cold fear in his stomach. Tonight, Lord Chiron would make his move. Tonight, the queen would die unless someone stopped it. And Taiho was the only one who knew. He had spent the last 5 days preparing. He had studied the layout of the palace until he knew every corridor and every hidden passage. He had practiced with his blade for hours each night, pushing his body until his muscles screamed. He had written a letter to Sora, telling her everything, and left it hidden in her medical bay in case he did not survive. Now there was nothing left to do but act. Taiho left his post in the outer ring. It was a crime. Guards who abandoned their posts could be executed. But he did not care about punishment anymore. He walked through the silver halls with calm steps, moving toward the center of the palace where the queen's throne room waited. The corridors were strangely empty. On most nights, servants and officials moved through the palace until late hours. But tonight, Taiho passed almost no one. It was as if everyone had sensed the danger and fled without knowing why. Or perhaps Lord Chiron had already cleared the way. Taiho's hand rested on the handle of his blade. It was a simple weapon, made of earth steel. The Valari guards carried plasma rifles and energy swords that could cut through walls. His blade seemed like a child's toy in comparison, but it was all he had. And he would use it. He reached the inner sections of the palace and began to climb toward the throne room. His heart was beating fast now. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy. Every sound made him tense. Then the explosions began. The eastern wing of the palace erupted in fire. The blast was so powerful that Taiho felt the floor shake beneath his feet. Alarms screamed through the corridors, their high-pitched wail filling the air. Red emergency lights flashed on the walls. The attack had started. Taiho began to run. He sprinted through corridors that were suddenly filled with chaos. Servants screamed and fled in all directions. Smoke poured through broken windows. Somewhere behind him, he heard the sharp crack of weapons firing. He ran toward the noise, not away from it. He pushed past fleeing people, his eyes focused on the path ahead. The throne room was close now. Just a few more corridors. Then he saw them. The royal guards were running toward him. Not to fight. not to protect their queen. They were running away. Their silver armor flashed in the emergency lights as they fled, their faces twisted with fear. These were the elite warriors of the Valari Empire, the finest soldiers in the galaxy. They had sworn sacred oaths to protect the queen with their lives, and they were abandoning her. Taiho felt a wave of disgust and disbelief. He grabbed one of the fleeing guards by the arm. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "The queen needs protection." The guard looked at him with wild eyes. He was trembling. "There are too many of them. Hundreds of mercenaries. Lord Chiron has an army. We cannot fight them." He pulled free and kept running. Taiho watched the guards flee. Every single one of them. The beings who had looked down on him for 2 years, who had called humans weak and disloyal, were abandoning their posts at the first sign of real danger. And somewhere ahead, the queen was alone. Taiho turned and ran toward the throne room. The sounds of battle grew louder. He could hear explosions and screams and the terrible hum of energy weapons. Smoke filled the air, making his eyes water. He reached the great doors of the throne room just as another explosion rocked the palace. The doors were massive, carved from ancient wood and decorated with golden symbols. One of them hung open. Taiho stepped inside. The throne room was vast, with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Tall pillars lined the walls. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood the silver throne of the Valari Empire. QueenHFY stood before it. She was alone. Her advisors had fled. Her guards had fled. The great room that usually held hundreds of courtiers was empty except for her single figure. The queen was young for a Valari, barely 100 cycles old. Her silver skin seemed to glow in the emergency lights, and her eyes were the color of deep water. She wore a simple white gown, and her long white hair fell around her shoulders like a waterfall. She did not look afraid. She stood tall and proud, watching the doors with the calm acceptance of someone who knew death was coming. Then she saw Taiho. Her eyes widened slightly. A human guard, standing in her throne room. It was unheard of. It was impossible. "You should run, human," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, without a trace of panic. "There is no honor in dying for a queen who is not your own. This is not your fight." Taiho walked forward until he stood between the queen and the doors. He drew his blade. The steel gleamed in the flashing red lights. "With respect, your majesty," he said quietly, "I will decide what I die for." QueenHFY stared at him. In all her years of rule, she had seen countless beings bow and promise loyalty. She had heard 1,000 oaths spoken with great ceremony. But she had never seen anything quite like this. A human, one of the weakest species in the galaxy, standing before her with nothing but a simple steel blade. Ready to face an army. Ready to die for a queen he had never even spoken to. Why? She asked. "You owe me nothing. Your kind means nothing to my people. Why would you throw away your life?" Taiho kept his eyes on the doors. He could hear the mercenaries coming now. Their boots pounded on the stone floors. Their voices called to each other with eager bloodlust. "Because someone has to," he said. "Because if no one stands when it matters, then nothing means anything." Outside the doors, shadows moved. Taiho tightened his grip on his blade. "Your Majesty," he said without turning, "please stay behind me." QueenHFY did not respond. She simply watched the small human who had placed himself between her and death. She did not understand him. She could not understand him. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. Something she had never felt before. It was the beginning of respect. The doors burst open, and Lord Chiron's mercenaries poured into the throne room. They came in a wave of black armor and cruel laughter, their weapons raised and ready. They expected no resistance. They expected an easy victory. They expected to find a terrified queen waiting to die. Instead, they found Taeho. One small human with a steel blade, standing alone before the silver throne, and he did not move. The first mercenary laughed when he saw Taeho. It was a cruel sound, full of contempt. The mercenary was huge, nearly 2 meters tall, with scars covering his face and arms. He wore heavy black armor and carried an energy blade that hummed with deadly power. "Look at this," he called to his companions. "A human thinks he can fight us. How brave. How stupid." The other mercenaries laughed as they spread out across the throne room. There were at least 30 of them, all heavily armed, all veterans of countless battles. They moved with the easy confidence of killers who had never known defeat. Taeho said nothing. He watched them come, his body relaxed, his breathing steady. He had trained for 2 years, practicing every day in his small room. He had studied the fighting styles of a dozen species. He had prepared for this moment without knowing it would ever come. Now it was here. And he was not afraid. The first mercenary attacked without warning. He was fast for his size, his energy blade cutting through the air with a deadly hum. He expected to kill the human with a single blow, but Taeho was not there. He moved at the last instant, sliding to the side like water around a stone. His steel blade flashed, and the mercenary screamed as it cut deep into the gap between his armor plates. Before the mercenary could recover, Taeho struck again, and the huge killer fell to the floor and did not move. The throne room went silent. The other mercenaries stared at their fallen companion. They looked at the small human standing over him, blade dripping red, face completely calm. Then they attacked all at once. Taeho had planned for this. He positioned himself in the narrow space between 2 pillars, using the architecture to his advantage. The mercenaries could not surround him. They could not bring their numbers to bear. They had to come at him through a choke point, 2 or 3 at a time. And Taeho met them with everything he had. He moved like something from a nightmare. He was small and fast, darting between the larger fighters, striking at weak points, never staying in one place long enough to be hit. His blade danced in the flashing emergency lights, leaving trails of blood with every swing. A mercenary thrust at him with an energy spear. Taeho ducked under the blow and drove his blade upward. Another mercenary swung a heavy axe at his head. Taeho stepped inside the arc of the swing and struck the killer in the throat, but there were too many of them. A plasma bolt caught Taeho in the shoulder. The pain was incredible, like fire burning through his flesh. He stumbled, but did not fall. He twisted away from the next attack and kept fighting. A blade cut across his ribs, opening a deep wound. Blood soaked his uniform. His vision started to blur at the edges. But still he fought. Behind him, QueenHFY watched in stunned silence. She had ruled the Valari Empire for 40 cycles. She had seen the greatest warriors of 100 worlds. She had watched battles and duels and tournaments. But she had never seen anything like this. The human was dying. She could see it. His wounds were too severe. His blood was pooling on the floor. And yet, he refused to fall. Every time a mercenary stepped forward, Taeho met them with steel and fury. Every time death reached for him, he pushed it back. "Why?" She whispered again, though she knew he could not hear her. "Why would you do this?" But somewhere deep inside, she was beginning to understand. Taeho had stopped counting the bodies. His world had shrunk to the simple rhythm of combat. Block, strike, move, block, strike, move. The pain faded into the background, replaced by a cold clarity that came from accepting death. He was not fighting to win anymore. He knew he could not win. He was fighting to buy time. Every second he held them back was another second the queen survived. Every mercenary he killed was one less to reach the throne. The mercenaries had stopped laughing. They looked at the pile of bodies around the human and felt something they had not expected to feel. Fear. This small, fragile creature from a primitive planet should have died in the first seconds of battle. Instead, he had killed more than 10 of their best fighters. He stood in a pool of his own blood, swaying on his feet, barely conscious. And still, he would not fall. What is he? One of the mercenaries muttered. No one answered. Lord Chiron pushed through his soldiers, his silver face twisted with impatience. He had expected the throne room to be his by now. He had expected to find the queen dead or begging for mercy. Instead, he found chaos. He looked at Taiho and felt a flash of hatred. A human, a worthless human guard, was ruining everything. Kill him, Lord Chiron ordered. All of you, kill him now. The remaining mercenaries hesitated. They looked at their fallen companions. They looked at the blood-soaked human who still held his blade ready. None of them wanted to be the next to die. Cowards, Lord Chiron screamed. He's just one human. One weak, pathetic human. Kill him. A mercenary finally stepped forward. He was younger than the others, eager to prove himself. He raised his weapon and charged at Taiho with a battle cry. Taiho met him with a strike so precise that it seemed almost gentle. The young mercenary fell without making a sound. Then alarms began to sound throughout the palace. Different alarms this time. Not the screaming of attack warnings, but the deep, powerful tones of military signals. The Imperial fleet had been alerted. Reinforcements were coming. Lord Chiron's face went pale. Someone had sent a message before the attack began. Someone had warned the outer garrisons. His plan was falling apart. Retreat, he ordered. Everyone fall back. The mercenaries did not need to be told twice. They turned and fled toward the exits, carrying their wounded, leaving their dead behind. Within moments, the throne room was empty except for the bodies on the floor. Lord Chiron paused at the door. He looked back at Taiho, who still stood before the throne, swaying like a tree in a storm. Their eyes met. This is not over, human, Lord Chiron said softly. I will remember you. Then he was gone. Taiho stood alone in the ruined throne room. The adrenaline was fading now, and the pain was coming back in terrible waves. His legs began to shake. His vision was growing dark at the edges. He had done it. He had held them long enough. The queen was alive. He turned slowly to look at her. She stood exactly where she had been, her silver eyes wide with an emotion he could not read. Your Majesty, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Are you hurt? Queen Nera shook her head. She seemed unable to speak. Taiho nodded. Good. That is good. Then his legs gave out, and he fell to the floor. His blade slipped from his fingers and clattered on the stone. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the queen's face above him. Her silver eyes filled with something that might have been tears. He had not known that. Velari could cry. It was a strange thought to have at the end, but it was not quite the end. Not yet, because somewhere in the distance, he could hear footsteps running toward the throne room. He could hear voices calling out. He could hear Sora screaming his name, and he realized, with something like surprise, that he might actually survive this. Commander Juan would have been proud. Taiho woke in a bed softer than anything he had ever felt. The ceiling above him was white and gleaming, decorated with beautiful patterns that seemed to move in the light. For a long moment, he did not know where he was. He did not know if he was alive or dead. Then the pain hit him, and he knew he was very much alive. His shoulder burned. His ribs ached. His whole body felt like it had been broken and put back together wrong. He tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a groan. Do not move. He turned his head and saw Sora sitting beside his bed. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling. Behind her, he could see medical equipment humming softly. He was in the palace hospital, in a private room that was nicer than any place he had ever been. "Sora," he managed to say. "What happened?" "How long?" "3 days," she said. "You have been unconscious for 3 days. The doctors were not sure you would survive. You lost too much blood. Your wounds were too severe." Her smile wavered. "But you are stubborn. You refuse to die." Taiho closed his eyes. The memories came back slowly. The throne room. The mercenaries. The queen standing alone. "The queen," he said suddenly. She is fine. She is alive because of you." Sora took his hand gently. "Taiho, do you have any idea what you did? The entire palace is talking about it. The entire empire is talking about it." Taiho shook his head weakly. He had not done anything special. He had just done what needed to be done. The Imperial fleet arrived and captured Lord Chiron before he could escape. Sora continued. "They found evidence of his treason everywhere. His allies are being arrested across the galaxy. The coup has completely failed." "Good," Taiho said. "That is good." Sora laughed, though there were tears in her eyes. "You fool. You nearly died, and all you can say is good?" "I am not good with words." "No," she agreed. "You never were." Taiho slept for another 2 days. When he finally felt strong enough to sit up, he had a visitor he did not expect. Queen Mira came to his room alone, without guards or advisors. She wore a simple blue gown, and her silver hair was tied back from her face. She looked different than she had in the throne room. Smaller, somehow. More real. She stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. "When you are well enough to stand," she finally said, "you will come to the throne room. There is a ceremony to be held." Taiho blinked in confusion. "A ceremony, Your Majesty? You saved my life. You stood alone against an army while every Valari guard fled in terror. Did you think such a thing would go without recognition?" Taiho did not know what to say. He had not thought about recognition. He had not thought about anything except doing what was right. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, "I was just doing my duty. Any guard should have done the same." Queen Mira's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or shame. "Yes," she said quietly. "Any guard should have. But none of them did. Only you." She paused. "I have ruled for 40 cycles. I have seen my people bow and swear oaths of loyalty. I have believed that the Valari were the finest warriors in the galaxy. And on the night when I truly needed them, every single one of them ran." She moved closer to his bedside. "Do you know how many mercenaries you killed that night?" She asked. Taiho shook his head. 14. 14 trained killers. You held the throne room alone for nearly 15 minutes against overwhelming odds. You were wounded again and again, and you refused to fall." Her voice was soft now, almost gentle. "I have never seen anything like it. I do not think anyone has ever seen anything like it." Taiho looked down at his hands. They were wrapped in bandages, but he could see the scars forming beneath. "I was afraid," he admitted. "The whole time, I was afraid, but you stayed." "Yes, I stayed." Queen Mira nodded slowly. "That is the difference," she said. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act despite the fear. My guards felt fear and ran. You felt fear and stayed. That is what makes you worthy of what comes next." 1 week later, the ceremony was held. The throne room had been repaired. The blood had been cleaned away, the damaged pillars replaced. Thousands of Valari nobles filled the great hall, their silver faces watching as Taiho walked slowly toward the throne. His wounds still hurt. He walked with a slight limp that the doctor said might never fully heal. But he walked with his head held high, and he did not look away from the eyes that watched him. Some of those eyes held admiration. Some held curiosity. And some, he noticed, held shame. He recognized a few faces in the crowd. Guards who had fled that night. Officers who had dismissed his warnings. They could not meet his gaze. QueenHFY stood before her throne in full ceremonial dress. Her silver crown gleamed in the light, and her voice rang through the hall like a bell. On the night the moons aligned, my palace was attacked. Traitors sought to take my throne and my life. And in my hour of greatest need, my guards, the elite warriors sworn to protect me, fled in terror. A murmur passed through the crowd. Many of the nobles looked uncomfortable, but one guard did not flee. One guard stood before my throne with nothing but a steel blade and refused to let the enemy pass. He was wounded again and again, and still he fought. He held the throne room alone until reinforcements arrived. He saved my life. She paused. That guard was not Valari. He was human, a species that we have long considered lesser, a species that we believed incapable of true courage or loyalty. We were wrong. The queen raised her hand, and a servant brought forward a small golden box. She opened it and removed a metal that shone with inner light. "Taiho," she said, her voice filling the silent hall, "I name you first shield of the Valari throne. This is the highest military honor in our empire. It has never before been given to a non-Valari. You are the first." Taiho knelt before the queen as she placed the medal around his neck. It was heavier than he expected, but it felt right. "Rise," QueenHFY said. "Rise and take your place beside me." Taiho stood. He turned and looked out at the thousands of faces watching him. Valari nobles, warriors, officials beings who had looked at humans with contempt for centuries. Now they looked at him with something different. Respect. In the days that followed, the story spread across the galaxy. Ships carried the tale from world to world. The human who had stood alone. The guard who would not run. The lesser species who had shown the greatest courage. On Earth, far across the stars, people heard the story and felt something stir inside them. Pride, perhaps, or hope. The universe was vast and often cruel, and humans were small in the face of it all. But now there was proof that smallness did not mean weakness. That brief lives could still hold infinite worth. Sora found Taiho one evening, standing at a window and watching the twin moons rise. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while. "Are you happy?" she finally asked. Taiho thought about it. He thought about Commander Juan, who had lived and died without recognition. He thought about all the humans scattered across the galaxy, serving and struggling and being dismissed as lesser. He thought about what he had done and what it might mean for them. "I do not know if I am happy," he said slowly, "but I think I am satisfied. I did what needed to be done. I showed them something they did not expect to see." "What is that?" Taiho looked at the moons. "That we are stronger than they think. That we are braver than they know. That when everything falls apart and everyone runs, sometimes it is the humans who stand." Sora leaned her head against his shoulder. "Commander Juan would have been proud of you," she said softly. "Yes," Taiho agreed. "I think he would have been." They watched the moons rise together, silver light spilling across the palace. Somewhere in the galaxy, other humans were hearing his story. Other humans were standing a little taller. Other humans were finding the courage to believe that they, too, could make a difference. Taiho had wanted to show them what humans were made of, and now the galaxy knew. They were made of something that could not be broken. Something that refused to kneel. Something that would stand alone against the darkness and hold the line until the end. They were made of courage. And courage, as it turned out, was the one thing the universe could never take away.